Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Autumn and today I am doing the mid-year freakout tag. This is the first time I have ever done this tag and I was so freaking excited as I was filling out the little questionnaire. I cannot wait to talk about all of the books I have sitting over here. For the beginning of the year, I had a goal that I wanted to read 50 books. And according to Storygraph, in the first 6 months from January to June, I read 25 books. So I was right on track with the goal that I had set for myself. I have basically been reading one book a week for the first 6 months of the year. So I'm very excited to report that. And the second reading goal I had set for myself is I wanted to read 24 books in 2024. I had 3 books that were honorable mentions. I did talk about these 24 books in a video, which I will leave linked down below if you're curious about what were those 24 books. So far with those 24 books plus 3 honorable mentions, I have only read 8 books on that list. I need to make sure I am looking up that list a little bit more regularly, considering I am technically 4 books behind on that list. I'll get to it. I'm not too concerned. For July, I have a few of those books on my list to read, so hopefully I'll be able to cross off a few more books on my 24 and 24 list. There were a lot of books that were very difficult to categorize, and some books would fall into multiple categories, but I didn't just want to sit up here and talk about the same 3 or 4 books. I tried to make sure all of the books that I read made it on this list. Anyways, let's go ahead and dive into the questions. Question number 1 is, what is the best book you have read so far in 2024? I would have to say that the top book I absolutely love and I still think about in July was the first book I read this year, which is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. There's so much amazing things I could sit here and talk about with this book. This was my first book by Akwaeke Emezi. I will definitely be reading this author more, but this book follows our main character Heyy, who's trying to learn how to love again. She lost her husband when she was young. They had been together, pretty much her first boyfriend, her first soulmate basically. So she lost her soulmate in a very tragic accident that we learn about through the story, and how Heyy is trying to learn to love again, and she has a really fun and quirky and just an all-around great friend that really is just somebody that you definitely want in your life. Her best friend tries to get her back out onto the market, and so she's starting to date a little bit. She doesn't really want strings attached or anything, and so she meets this one guy and they connect. They're kind of hanging out a little bit together. This guy that she's been seeing for a while invites her to his home on this tropical island. So she goes and she finds herself falling for this man's dad. This story is so beautifully written. The audiobook narrator killed it. I just cannot talk more highly about how Akwaeke Emezi crafted their characters, the pacing of this story, the writing style of this story. This was such a terrific book. There was a lot of trauma and there was so much heartbreak, and I was crying, I was laughing. I just had an absolutely terrific time with this book. If you can get past a lot of the swearing that happens in this book, that was one of the things I didn't quite enjoy about this book. There was a lot of swearing on like probably 85% of the pages in this book. But if you can look past all of that and look at the beauty inside of this story, you're gonna have an absolutely heartbreakingly loving time if you can put those 2 words in the same sentence. Question number 2, what is the best sequel you've read so far? In full transparency, I have not read too many sequels this year. I feel like by default, I should say The Rose and the Dagger by Renee Audier. So this book follows The Wrath and the Dawn, and it's a YA fantasy romance, and this book follows the aftermath, like immediately after the events of what happens in The Wrath and the Dawn. So I won't spoil and say too much about this one, and I have The Wrath and the Dawn as an answer to another question, so I will get to what the synopsis is of this story, this duology, when we get to the other book. This is the first sequel I've completed so far in 2024 for the first half of the year. So I feel like by default, this is the answer because I've only read 1. Was it the best book I've ever read? No, I gave it 3.5 stars. It was a fine sequel following The Wrath and the Dawn, which I gave 5 stars, I believe, because I loved that book. But this book, I feel like it was an okay sequel. If you're watching this and you consider this book a sequel, I gave this book 5 stars, but it is Beren and Luthien by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's not necessarily a sequel. So this was the author that wrote The Lord of the Rings, but I have a book club with one of my buddies. Her name is Brie Bonomo. In our book club for the last couple of years, we've been reading all of Tolkien's work. This is one of Tolkien's stories, and it's more mentioned in the Silmarillion. Beren and Luthien has its own little book, and I loved this book so much. It was one of my favorites when it was in the Silmarillion. If you would consider this a sequel, I feel like this is like super far-fetched because it's not really a sequel. In fact, the events of this happened before The Lord of the Rings, but I would say that this I loved. I loved this story so freaking much. It was so cute, it was so tragic, and I loved it so much. This could be a contender, possibly. I mean, in my mind, it would be. And I mean, I'm the one doing the tag, right? However, I do have another book that I am in the middle of, and he's a chunky boy. I am currently reading Valor by John Gwynne, which is the second book in the 4-book series, The Faithful and the Fallen. The first book is Malice, but I'm still working on this big boy. I don't feel like I can say this is the best sequel I've read this year because I'm not finished with it. Question number 3, what is a new release you haven't read yet, but you want to? I had a couple of books in this slot. This book was published at the end of 2023. I believe it was November. It's not necessarily a book that came out in 2024, but it's less than a year old, so it could be considered a new release, and it's going to be considered a new release for my video today. But I am just going to settle on Vengeance of the Pirate Queen by Trisha Levenseller. I have read a lot of Trisha Levenseller's work, and I'll be honest, she's probably one of my favorite authors for YA. I love this cover. I pre-ordered it. The sprayed edges are absolutely gorgeous. So the first book in this series is Daughter of the Pirate King, and I had a blast with that book. I'm not going to read the synopsis of this since it's the 3rd book in a series. I loved the first book, absolutely loved the second book. Cannot wait for the 3rd book. Question number 4 is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? It's going to be another Trisha Levenseller, and it is The Darkness Within Us. This is the second book in the series. I don't know if there will be any more, but this book is the sequel to The Shadows Between Us, which I absolutely loved that book, and I do own that book as well. I have pretty high expectations of book 2. Number 5, I have 3 books that I will try and briefly talk to you guys about. So question number 5 is my biggest disappointment. The first one I want to talk about is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. So this book follows our 2 main characters. They both started with S's. Is it Sam and Sadie? Sam and Sadie. This book pretty much follows their entire life from when they're children to when they're, I believe, in their mid-30s. Their relationship is quite interesting. This book pretty much surrounds their complicated relationship with each other, but then also their interesting relationship with video games. Now, I love video games. That is not meant to be an insult, but I just found the writing style in this book very odd. And there is one chapter, if you've read this book, you probably know what I am talking about, but without, spoiling anything, there's a very odd chapter in the second half of this book that I felt was so unnecessary. It was weird. It pulled me out of the story. I didn't like it. And on top of that one chapter, I just did not vibe with the 2 main characters. I didn't like them as individuals. I didn't like them together. I just did not care for this book at all. This was unfortunate. This was a pretty big disappointment. I don't remember what my star rating was for it. Probably a 3. It was just like middle of the road. I did read this book for a reading vlog, so I will leave that reading vlog linked down below if you're curious about more in-depth thoughts for this book. The next book I want to talk about is Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. I got this book for Christmas last year in 2023, and this book is a dual timeline. So it follows present day, where this girl named Ellie Mack, she had gone missing, and in present day it is her mom pretty much learning how to cope with knowing what happened to her daughter, with her daughter being abducted, everything that surrounds that. And then you also have a timeline which is past tense, so the events that led up to Ellie Mack's disappearance and what happened during that time. I did not like the writing style in this book. I read this book back in January, and if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was the sentence structure of this book that really just put me out of the story. I also listened to the audiobook and I thought the audiobook was fine, but to be totally honest, I just didn't like this book. This was, I think, a 2-star read for me, and I just was not vibing with it. I was pretty disappointed because typically with my thrillers, I do like dual timelines. Like, I eat that shit up, but I wasn't eating this up. I did not like this book, unfortunately. And the last book I'm going to talk about, and I am not going to harp on this book any longer after the next 30 seconds, A Door in the Dark by Scott Rankin. I have talked about this book in a reading vlog, in my recent reads wrap-up video. I feel like I have really hammered this book as to why I just don't like it. This was also a 2-star read for me. I think it was a 2-star. There was a lot of issues I had with this book, going from your characters to the plot, to the sentence structure, to the magic system and the world building. There was a lot wrong with this book, unfortunately. I will probably be unhauling this pretty soon. Question number 6, what was your biggest surprise? I have 2 books for this one. The first book is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Audier. I had talked about the sequel to this one, which is The Rose and the Dagger. I am just going to briefly read you guys the synopsis of this book because I feel like this will do a much better job than me. It says, Khalid, the 18-year-old Caliph of Khorasan, is a monster. Each night he takes a new wife, only to have her killed by sunrise. Shazi is the first volunteer to become Khalid's bride. She vows to stop his reign of terror, for the friends she lost and for all those who perished before her. Night after night, she mesmerizes the Caliph with her storytelling, at once buying time and digging deeper into the elusive boy king's past. If Khalid is truly the murderous madman everyone says he is, how does Shazi find it so easy to fall for him? This book was my biggest surprise, mainly because I was obsessed with the writing style in this book. Renee Audier has phenomenal storytelling. I absolutely loved the writing in this and how she crafted her characters. So good, so amazing. I was just addicted to this. I think I read this book within a day, maybe 2 days. It was so addictive, so easy to read, and I loved it. I cannot talk more highly of this book. It was definitely a shock to the system as to why I just wasn't expecting to love it as much. And this was my first book by this author, and as you can tell, I loved it so much I immediately read book 2. Now we're kind of swinging in the other direction here, still on the same question. This one was a biggest surprise, but in a good way, and I would say that this one was the biggest surprise, but not in the best way. Like, I'm not disappointed in this book, but I was just surprised I didn't enjoy it as much. And this book is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I love V.E. Schwab, but I was not invested in this book as much as I have been with V.E. Schwab's other work. With me saying that, her writing style is still fantastic. I still really love V.E. Schwab's writing. What I did not really jive with this book is the lack of character development, character motive, character interactions. I just felt like this story was very dull compared to A Darker Shade of Magic or The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This book, I felt like it was one of V.E. Schwab's weaker books. So I did an entire reading vlog talking about this book. So I'll leave it linked down below. And I did talk about this in a recent reads video. So I won't go too much into detail because if you're curious about my thoughts on that, you should definitely go check out those videos. But just know that this one was a biggest surprise, but it was more on the disappointing side than being really happy and shocked just because I loved a book so much. This was just middle of the road for me, and that is all I have to say about it. Question number 7, new favorite author. It could be a debut author or just a new to me author. I had quite a few authors I am going to talk about. I absolutely loved Sarah Penner. She was the author of The Lost Apothecary, and I really enjoyed that book. I believe I gave it 4 or 4.5 stars. I think that this author has a really amazing writing style, and I thought that she did a pretty decent job with creating characters that I felt really connected to. And I loved the bouncing back and forth between the 2 timelines. I wouldn't say she is my all-time favorite author, but I would definitely pick up some more books from this author in the future. The next one up, which might not come as a surprise because this author is so popular, but Emily Henry I had read Beach Read just a few months ago. It was my first Emily Henry, and I really enjoyed it. Did I think I was just blown away with the writing and the characters and what was going on in the story? No, but I think Emily Henry is a really solid palate cleanser. Her characters also have a lot of baggage and a lot of trauma. I think that she captures it in a good, decent way, but it doesn't take away from the story because it is a romance. I really enjoyed it, and I think I would pick up some more Emily Henry if I just wanted something that was nice, fun, relaxing. You know, there was a little bit of depth to it, but I just wanted something to clean my palate from either reading a lot of thrillers or a lot of fantasy, and I would just throw in a romance. The next author, and it's also going to be the last author on this list, is Stacey Willingham. I just finished reading her debut, which is A Flicker in the Dark. Loved that book. I loved it so much. I think this author has so much freaking potential. I believe she has a few more books written now, and I have not picked them up, and I'm not quite sure what they are. I had such a great time with this book. While I wouldn't say her thriller was completely unpredictable, nothing like Frida McFadden, I think that's how you pronounce her last name. I wasn't, thrown off with twists and turns and things like that. I just think with Stacey Willingham, at least with this first book, A Flicker in the Dark, when I went into this book just to have a great time, no strings attached, just wanting to vibe with a thriller, this was exactly what I was looking for. I will definitely keep reading more of Stacey Willingham. Question number 8, newest fictional crush. I have 3. I have mentioned one of the books already, but it is the main character Khalid in The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Audier. I had a huge crush on Khalid. That first kiss scene had me freaking out. I loved that first kiss scene. It was everything I wanted and more. He was definitely my crush because a king and in the desert, say no more. Say no more. Even though he's 18 and that's like really weird, I always age up my characters in my head. I should also say that. I know it says he's 18 here. I would age him up in my head, but I definitely had a crush on this man. So the next character, which we're also going to pretend that he's aged up, in Instructions for Dancing by Nicola Yoon, I absolutely loved X. X was just that breath of life that you want. The way he made our main character feel, made me feel, oh my gosh, and a man that can dance, stop it. Just stop. I just think that X was a terrific character, and I think just this book in general was so good, even though I think I gave it 4 stars if I'm not mistaken, because I had a few issues, not necessarily with X and our main character. There were a few other things I had issues with this story, and I believe I read this for a reading vlog as well. I'll leave it linked down below. I need to stop or I'm gonna start crying. The last book boyfriend is in Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson, and this character, his name is Jace. Oh my gosh, I was obsessed with Jace. He was this king of thieves basically, and I just loved him. And so this book was dual POV. So we got our female main character and then we got our male main character who was Jace, and I loved being inside his head. I just loved it, and he was a family man. If I could have had a blend of these 3 men in this, like one giant man that was these 3, perfection. Let's just go ahead and move on. The next question, which is question number 9, what is my newest favorite character? I have mentioned this in I think 1 or 2 reading vlogs. In Malice by John Gwen, one of my favorite characters in this, and he is listed on the back, his name is Corbin. He just has my heart. In this book, he starts out as 15 years old, and this book spans over 2 or 3 years. By the time this book ends, he's like 16 or 17, and just watching the things that he's gone through in life, I just want to give him a hug. I am so protective over him. This is like little brother protective. These men here in these 3 books from question number 8, they would be book boyfriends. Corbin would be a book baby brother. I can't get over how much I love Corbin. He is such an incredible character, and there's so much that's put on his shoulders for only being 14 or 15 or 16, and maybe he's 17, but he has to grow up so fast. I did have two characters for my new favorite characters, and this was the first book that I answered in question number 1, but the book is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi, and her name is Faye Adekola, and I loved Faye. I feel like Faye just represented such an incredibly strong character who just went through so much heartbreak and went through so much that someone at 25, at 30, really at any age, but at the age that she was at, those are things that she should never have had to go through. I think Faye is probably of all time one of my favorite characters. Okay, so this next question, it took me a little bit of time to try and find a book that I hadn't already mentioned that made me cry, and I'll be totally honest, I couldn't think of one. I am not one to cry, and if I do cry, it is one hell of a book. And the only book that I feel like I have read in this first half of the year that deserves this spot is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. I have talked about this book in 3 questions now. I feel like you get my point. It made me cry. There, I said it. Question number 11. What is a book that made you happy? So there are 2 books on this list for this answer. The first book is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This book made me so happy, mainly because how strategic the author was with tying everything together, and it had a library in it. I loved our main character. She was so freaking cool, and I just was vibing with her. She was so chill. She was so cool. I also really did enjoy the love interest. He's not a book boyfriend though. Nice try, but he's not. I loved this. I loved how the magic system all had a whole point to it, and then we had a couple of other side characters that I really enjoyed with this. There was one part in this, oh, did this part make me cry? But there is one part in here that was so sad, and I'm not gonna spoil that part. If you know, you know. It got me in the feels. But this book overall made me happy, and I just loved it so much. So let me just give you the brief synopsis of Sorcery of Thorns, just really fast. It says, all sorcerers are evil. Elizabeth has known that as long as she has known anything. Raised as a foundling in one of Ashmere's great libraries, Elizabeth has grown up among magical grimoires that rattle beneath iron chains, capable of transforming into grotesque monsters. When an act of sabotage releases the library's most dangerous grimoire, Elizabeth is accused of treason. With no one to turn to but her sworn enemy, the sorcerer Nathaniel Thorne, and his mysterious servant, she finds herself entangled in a centuries-old conspiracy. Not only could the great libraries go up in flames, but the world along with them. The other book on this list is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I talked about Emily Henry a couple of questions ago. I loved this book, even though I had kind of a lot of baggage with this book. I still really loved this. It made me happy. What can I say? Let me just briefly read you the synopsis for Beach Read, and then we can move on. We are nearing the end. This has been such a long video. Good googly moogly. The synopsis for Beach Read says, a romance writer who no longer believes in love and a literary writer stuck in a rut engage in a summer-long challenge that may just upend everything they believe about happily ever afters. Augustus Everett is an acclaimed author of literary fiction. January Andrews writes best-selling romance. When she pens a happily ever after, he kills off his entire cast. They're polar opposites. In fact, the only thing they have in common for the next 3 months is that they are living in neighborhood houses, broke and bogged down with writer's block. Until one hazy evening, one thing leads to another, and they strike up a deal designed to force them out of their creative ruts. Augustus will spend the summer writing something happy, and January will pen the next great American novel. She'll take him on field trips worthy of a rom-com montage, and he'll take her to interview surviving members of a backwoods death cult. Obviously, everyone will finish a book and no one will fall in love. Really. I thought that this was so fun. And really it was the writing style that made it just kind of like quirky and fun and upbeat, and I thought that it was great and it did make me happy. And I will definitely read more from Emily Henry when I kind of want something that's a little fun, a little bit of romance with like no strings attached, you know? Question number 12. What is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received? So the books I have here, they are books I have purchased this year. They weren't published this year. I know that wasn't part of the question, but I wanted to specify that I bought these books, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're new releases. So the first book that I purchased was The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Bowley. Look at that. The cover of this is just absolutely stunning. The next book I also think is a very beautiful cover. I should say I've got 3 total. The second book is The Night Ship by Jess Kidd. This cover actually sold me to get this book, and I love it. I still love how it wraps around the entire book. It's so beautiful. I'm really excited for this because it kind of gives me the Lost Apothecary vibes, because I do like when there are 2 different timelines, but when something happens a long time ago and then something happens in somewhat present day. I love that. I love to see how an author cleverly constructs a book like this. So I'm very excited for this one, but I love the cover. Absolutely stunning. And the last book on here, and I have mentioned this book in a couple of other videos, is The Return of Ellie Black by Amiko Jean. And this cover is just absolutely stunning. I just cannot get enough of this cover. I think it is just too beautiful for words. Like with the black and the orange, I cannot. Okay, so the last question, which is question number 13. What books do you need to read by the end of the year? While I talked about at the very beginning of this very long video that I have only read 8 out of my 24 plus 3 honorable mentions. Since I've only read 8 books on that list, I still need to read the other, 19 or however many books that are still remaining on that. I'm not going to sit here and mention another like 15 plus books to you. However, I want to say that the top 3 I have are these books. So the first one is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have read a Taylor Jenkins Reid in the past, and I actually really liked it. The reason I've been putting this off is because I want to read it with the audiobook, but the audiobook is like several months out before I can use it. So I'm on that waiting list, but hopefully I can get to it by the end of the year. The next book on this list is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. Same situation as with The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I've been waiting for the audiobook on Libby, which actually came in just a few days ago. So hopefully I'll be able to knock this book off of my list. I feel like this is going to be a less traumatic, a less hard-hitting book than The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I think it's Matt Haig who wrote that book. So this kind of gives me similar vibes. It also kind of reminds me of The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So hopefully I like this book, because I have been on the wait list for the audiobook for this since the beginning of the year. So wish me luck on this, and hopefully I like it. Now the last book on this list, and I have been so excited for this book ever since I purchased it, and I want to say I purchased it last summer, and it is The Curse of Saints by Kate Dramis. So I actually follow this author on Instagram, and she is coming out with book 2. I can't remember what that one is called. Is it The Curse of Sins, maybe? I have been wanting to read this book ever since I saw it in Barnes & Noble and knew I had to have it. This sounds so good, and when I had purchased this last summer, I had no idea that it was going to be a series or a duology. I'm not quite sure, but I didn't know there was going to be a book that came after it until just very recently. I am excited for this. I'm a little nervous now that I know it's not just a standalone. I'm still gonna read it anyways. Those are all 13 questions. That is my mid-year freak out tag. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know how you're doing, a mid-year check-in with you. Let me know the books you've read, what you want to read for the rest of the year. If you've read any of the books I talked about here, or did I put something new on your TBR? Definitely let me know. But if you're still watching and you don't know what else to say, leave me the little flame emoji down below in the comments, because it just feels like we're gonna be fine, right? We'll be fine. Everything is fine. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. My name is Autumn, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.